KI, künstliche Intelligenz, ist eine tolle Sache, keine Frage. Bestimmt habt ihr auch schon ganz viel mit KI rumexperimentiert, Texte geschrieben, Bilder erzeugt und vieles andere mehr. Aber habt ihr euch auch schon mal Gedanken darüber gemacht, wie viel Aufwand eigentlich betrieben werden muss, um KI anzubieten? Das ist nämlich eine ganze Menge. Ich habe da einen Vergleich für euch. 300 Google-Anfragen verbrauchen genauso viel Energie wie eine Anfrage bei ChatGPT zum Beispiel. 300 mal so viel Energiestrom braucht eine Anfrage bei KI, bei einem Chatbot, wie bei einer Suchanfrage bei Google. Wenn man also nur ganz schnell mal was wissen will, dann besser bei Google nachgucken. Wenn man auf die Energiebilanz guckt, das liegt auf der Hand. Natürlich hat man bei ChatGPT, wenn man da sich eine richtig tolle Antwort zusammenbauen lässt oder vielleicht sogar einen Text erstellen lässt, auch einen richtig guten Value für diesen Energieaufwand. Aber nicht immer ist KI die bessere Lösung. Aber bei diesem Punkt habe ich gedacht, ich möchte mal genauer wissen, wie viel Energie verbraucht eigentlich KI und übrigens nicht nur Strom, auch Ressourcen und Wasser. Schaut's euch an.
Das offizielle Motto der Republika lautet Who cares? Ja, wen kümmert's eigentlich, wie viel Energie zum Beispiel Smartphones verbrauchen, wenn wir sie benutzen und erst recht die immer populärer werdenden KI-Systeme. Chatbots wie ChatGPT beantworten uns alle Fragen, wir können sogar mit ihnen sprechen. KI erstellt Bilder, Audios und bald auch Videos. Endlose Möglichkeiten. Wir stehen erst am Anfang, was künstliche Intelligenz betrifft, aber eins ist klar, KI wird in alle Bereiche unseres Lebens vordringen, im Privatbereich, aber auch im Arbeitsbereich. Und um KI anbieten zu können, braucht es Rechenkapazität, und zwar jede Menge. Und deswegen bauen die Anbieter überall auf der Welt riesengroße Rechenzentren und die brauchen vor allem eins: Energie, Strom, aber überraschenderweise auch Wasser und sehr viele Ressourcen. Google, Microsoft, Meta, sie alle betreiben schon jetzt gigantische Rechenzentren nur für KI-Anwendungen. Wir sehen sie nur nicht. Allein der Strombedarf ist gigantisch. Prognosen gehen durch rasant steigende Nutzerzahlen von einem Stromverbrauch der weltweiten KI-Systeme von über 80 Terawattstunden pro Jahr aus. Das entspricht dem von ganzen Ländern wie den Niederlanden, Schweden oder Argentinien. Einer, der vor den Folgen des ungezügelten Wachstums warnt, ist Paris Marx. Er ist in den USA und in der Szene sehr bekannt für seinen tech-kritischen Podcast Tech Won't Save Us. Technik wird uns nicht retten. Der Energiebedarf der großen Rechenzentren ist einfach gigantisch. Heutige Rechenzentren beherbergen Zehntausende von Servern und die verbrauchen Unmengen an Strom und erzeugen jede Menge Hitze. Die muss aber runtergekühlt werden. Häufig wird dazu Wasser genutzt, Grundwasser, das in den ländlichen Gebieten dann oft fehlt. Wasserkühlung ist viel effektiver als Klimaanlagen, spart also Strom. Doch Wasser ist eine begrenzte Ressource. In den USA gibt es im Umfeld von Rechenzentren schon sehr viele Proteste der Bevölkerung, erzählt mir Paris Marx. Aber auch für die Herstellung all der Hardware, also der Computer, ist ein enormer Energieaufwand nötig. Um all die Server für KI-Rechenzentren zu bauen, braucht es unvorstellbare Mengen an Ressourcen, Mineralien zum Beispiel. Und um die zu gewinnen, wird ebenfalls jede Menge an Energie und Wasser verbraucht. Die Hardware wird aber ganz schnell wieder aussortiert. Mangels vernünftigem Recycling entsteht so jede Menge Elektromüll. Aspekte, die Politik und Konsumenten bislang nicht auf den Zettel haben. Da der Einsatz von KI in den nächsten Jahren aber explodieren dürfte, wird das ein zunehmend wichtiges Thema. Wir brauchen deshalb dringend Transparenz über verbrauchte Ressourcen, mahnen Experten wie Paris Marx, und klare Regeln, wie in anderen Industrien auch.
Ja, Paris Marx ist ein sehr bekannter Technikexperte aus Kanada, aus Montreal, aber eben auch in den USA super bekannt, weil er viele Dinge hinterfragt, eben aber auch, wie viel Energie eigentlich künstliche Intelligenz verbraucht. Nicht um KI schlecht zu machen, sondern damit wir genauer hingucken, was wir uns da eigentlich alles ranzüchten. Denn die vielen KI-Systeme, die werden ja immer mehr und verbrauchen also auch immer mehr Energie. Und da ist die Frage erlaubt: kann man das so machen, dass wir unterm Strich besser dastehen als vorher. Das Interview, das ich gemacht habe oder geführt habe mit Paris Marx, war natürlich sehr lang. Ihr habt gerade nur kurze Ausschnitte gesehen und jetzt könnt ihr mal das ganze Interview sehen in englischer Sprache. Ihr könnt natürlich die Untertitel auch auf YouTube euch anschauen und habt dann auch eine Übersetzung. Wenn ihr unten in die Captions schaut, da habe ich eine komplette Übersetzung vom Interview auch im Angebot für euch. Also viel Spaß dabei. Paris Marx, nice to have you.
Yeah, it's great to speak with you. Great to be here.
Paris Marx ist ein Podcaster und ein Experte für KI-Themen, unter anderem und Tech-Themen. Er ist ein Tech-Kritiker, möchte ich sagen. Und ich freue mich sehr, mit ihm hier zu sprechen. Und vor allem möchte ich mit ihm sprechen über das Thema KI und Energienutzung und Energiebedürftigkeit sozusagen von KI. You are in artificial intelligence, right? What do you think about artificial intelligence?
I'm skeptical that it's going to have the big impact that a lot of these companies are talking about. I think certainly these tools are going to stick around to a certain degree, but I don't think they're going to have the transformative impact that some of the companies are suggesting. They'll change how work is done in some sectors, they'll change how we do certain things, but I think like it often is in the tech industry, there's a big boom, there's a lot of excitement right now, there's a lot of money flowing in, but it will wind down and they'll move on to something else in a year or two.
But artificial intelligence isn't going away anymore.
No, certainly not. And, you know, we talk a lot right now about artificial intelligence, and we mean generative AI in particular, ChatGPT and these image generators. But artificial intelligence is a very abstract term that refers to a lot of different things, like even the autocorrect on our phones can be artificial intelligence. So it's not going anywhere. We're going to keep using it. The question is just how much we're going to be using these new tools, or how much, you know, they're just being hyped up in the moment to drive investment and things like that.
Exactly, and there we have artificial intelligence we do see and we do use, and there is artificial intelligence we don't see, but it's there almost. But you have an eye especially on the energy consumption, right? What do you have to say about that? How many energy does artificial intelligence consume?
So it's really significant, right? And I think that this is an underexplored area of what is happening right now. So the companies are trying to roll out these generative AI tools like the ChatGPTs and the image generators and want us to use them. And they want to put these types of models in a lot of the different products that we use. But what they're not telling us is that they require a lot of computing power. And that means that they require a lot of energy and a lot of water in order to power them. And ultimately that all happens in these large kind of warehouses, which can have tens of thousands of servers in them that we call data centers. And the companies are building a lot more of those around the world right now. So it has a lot of energy and resource demands in a lot of communities. And we see more and more that communities are fighting back against the construction of these. And so I think it's going to become an issue that's going to become much more common, that we're going to hear about a lot more in the coming years.
One one ChatGPT request is comparable to 300 Google requests. So that's a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot, right? And we don't recognize this when we use these tools. And one of the things that's happening right now is certainly the companies are rolling out all of these generative AI models and these chatbots because that's what's exciting, and that's what's kind of driving investment and higher valuations right now. But there's a growing question in, you know, say the business community and among investors of how they're going to actually make money with all of these tools. Because if they do require so much computation and if they do require so much energy, they're much more expensive to run than what they were doing before. And the companies, even the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, haven't actually shown how they're going to turn a profit on all these tools.
Energy is one point. That means electricity, of course, but there is more energy in artificial intelligence. The hardware, for example. What can you tell us about that?
Certainly. And so to make all of these servers, to make all of this computer equipment that goes into running it, obviously you need minerals to do that, right? You need to extract a lot of things from the earth in order to create these computer parts that then go into these data centers and go into our phones and our laptops and all these sorts of things. But in these data centers, they get cycled out really quickly because they're used very intensely. And so the more and more that these are built, the more computer parts are needed, which is why a company like NVIDIA right now is seeing a lot of sales and is seeing its share prices go up. But there's not a great recycling pipeline on the other end. So when they get churned out, they just become e-waste. And so that becomes a bigger problem here as well, as the expectation is that we're going to use more of these technologies.
So what do you want the people or the companies to do, or the government, for example? More regulation, more transparency?
I think it's a mix of considering what the government needs to do and what the public needs to do, right? As I was saying, in a number of countries, we see a lot of people pushing back on the construction of these data centers, not because they hate AI or not because they necessarily hate these tech companies, but because they see that the water demands and the energy demands are just too much for them to shoulder, right? Because it takes away from other things that their communities are doing. And I think that on the side of the companies, they are certainly doing what works best for their business models and what they feel is going to drive investment in their companies. So it's not surprising that they're doing these sorts of things because generative AI is what is, getting people excited in the moment. And so that means governments need to think about what technologies are actually okay for us to be using, if there should be regulations on the amount of energy that is required for these sorts of things. And that's a really big conversation, but it's ultimately not the one that we're having right now because it's probably not the ones that the company wants us to be having.
That's absolutely true. So water is an issue too. So in what way, and what normal people wouldn't believe that water could be an issue with artificial intelligence? Can you explain that?
Absolutely. It's a huge issue, right? Because if you think about it, these massive data centers have tens of thousands of servers crammed into it. We know that when we use our computers, our laptops, they get hot when we use them. So when you have all of these servers crammed into this one large space, they're going to create a lot of heat. And so that needs to be cooled down. And one of the ways they do that is with water cooling. So they need a lot of water in order to cool, down all of these computers. And that leads to a lot of demand on the water supplies of a lot of countries. And what we see is that in some cases, these companies build their data centers in quite dry areas because they can get access to cheap electricity. But that means that they're sucking up a lot of the water that local people depend on. And so that is one of the reasons why a lot of communities are pushing back against these developments, because they're concerned about their continued access to water, whether other businesses in their communities that are more socially beneficial can get access to that water, and really just the health of, say, their rivers and their waterways and the types of species that they want to continue to see thrive there.
Water is a very effective way of cooling machines, better than air, for example. But if you use water to cool down servers and farms and etc., how does it make the water vanish? The water is still there, isn't it? So is it a real problem? Why don't we have a circulation of the water?
Yeah, and it depends, right? In some cases, the water gets heated up to such a degree that it can be harmful to, the river or the watershed that it gets put back into. Some of these waters can be, made dirty and unusable as a result of going through this process. It really depends on how it's set up. But then the other piece of this too is that it is possible to locate these data centers in places where, cooling is easier, like cooler environments. We're seeing a push to build more in the Nordic countries, which they're having their own issues with as well, beyond water use and things like that. So there are potential ways to look at reducing the amount of water that is needed, but ultimately, when you're building as many data centers as these companies are currently engaged in, hundreds and hundreds of data centers, massive data centers around the world, that just requires a lot of water from anywhere, and at a point, it just becomes too much to handle.
Do you think the US or the EU is going to fix it?
I would be skeptical if either does, to be honest. I think that what we see is that in the places where governments are starting to take actions against data centers, it's not because, elected officials have decided that they want to do that, but because they're being pushed to do it by communities. So we've seen temporary moratoriums on data center construction in Ireland, in the Netherlands, and in Singapore, because people have been demanding it and have said, that these things go too far. There are too many data centers being built. So ultimately, if we're going to see action to restrict the amount of energy or the amount of water that these companies can use, that these data centers can use, I think it's really going to come from residents and citizens demanding it happen, rather than governments deciding this is just something they need to do for no other reason.
Tesla knows what you are talking about here in Germany. Last question. Do you use artificial intelligence without any bad feeling? Because all of that, what you're knowing, most people don't know that.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And to be honest, I don't use a lot of it. as we were talking about, there's a difference between artificial intelligence generally and these new tools that are much more computationally intensive. So I don't use ChatGPT and I don't use the image generators. On the one hand, because of the energy use, but also just because, I'm kind of ethically opposed to them. And I don't personally see the uses in my life. That's not to say that there aren't other AI tools that I use and that really, as you were saying, there's not AI just all over the place and we can't escape it totally. I don't think that individuals should be too concerned about their uses. Certainly you can think about the way that you use different technologies, but ultimately reducing the energy use, reducing the computation, reducing the water use, that happens at a level far above the individual. And so that requires action against companies and action to push governments to actually, start to pass regulations that would do that. So yeah, if people want to use AI, I think they're okay to do that.
So hearing that, I don't expect you to replace your own human voice by artificial intelligence.
No, my podcast is not going to be hosted by ChatGPT or anything like that anytime soon.
And that's good. Thanks so much, Paris.
Thanks so much.
Was sagt ihr jetzt? Was denkt ihr über KI und den Energieverbrauch, auch den Wasserverbrauch von künstlicher Intelligenz? Schreibt's gerne in die Kommentare. Ciao.